Welcome to What the Hex, your source for Warhammer Underworlds in under 30 wins that you never saw coming. I'm your co-host, Davey. With me, as always, I've got Phil. How are you doing, Phil?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good.
And with us today, we've managed to briefly ascertain the location of the mysterious Madskullz. How are you doing, sir?
I'm very British, thank you.
We'll talk if you know anything about his presence online. You probably have a sense of what our theme is for today. We'll circle back around to that in just a second. Our context for this episode: the most recent things to happen of note in Warhammer Underworlds was that Rippus Snarlfangs, the gift set, and such have recently released, along with the worldwide release of the Condemners and Lady Harrow's Mournflight. We are eagerly anticipating our next couple of warbands. In the meantime, you're always welcome to get in touch with us. We're at WTHcast, and you should do that because we have a contest going. You can win one expansion of your choice if you can guess. Well, I'll say this. So you get one entry for guessing and a second entry. Basically, you get double credit if you guess correctly, and then we'll draw all the names out of the hat. And you are trying to guess which fighter was the most frequently pictured on the card art from the first two Warhammer Underworld seasons. And if you want to hear more about that, you can listen back to our last episode. In the meantime, we like to do some community shout outs. Phil, I think you had one right off the bat here.
Yeah, so they posted another Warhammer community article for the Cataphrane Chronicle, which, for those who don't know, is basically GW's official community page posting articles that were written by community members. We've had this most recent one by Aman about the Wild Hunt, and then we've had one from John Reese before. And I just thought it was kind of cool that they're continuing this trend of actually working with our community to have featured articles for their main website, and realizing that sort of involvement is probably going to be beneficial for getting people involved in this game. So kudos to them for getting involved and getting pulled into that, and then kudos to the community team for continuing that involvement.
Yeah, I agree. My shout out would go to Tom Bond over on the Steel City Underworlds blog. He had a little bit of time where he sounds like he came to Beastgrave about a month late, and so this is his musings on the meta. And I remember seeing the title of the article and thinking like, I don't know if there's a whole lot of new, but I really enjoyed reading that. I thought it was excellent. I remember specifically having the thought while I was reading it, like, this is a really good article. So hats off to Tom over at Steel City Underworlds. Madskullz, you have any community shout outs, or should we move along?
Well, just always Well of Power, run by Wiggle and various people. Article by Gora about how to be successful in tournaments, loads of deck builds, all that kind of jazz. So just a great website for the community on every level.
That is an excellent point. And actually, it segues into our next part, which is what the hex is going on with you. I'm going to take that first, actually, because I used Well of Power. I stole Wiggle's Rippus Snarlfang deck, made a couple of very minor modifications, and have been I kind of caught the bug after we sort of chatted about them a little bit in the last episode. Been trying them out, and I've been having some good success, and I don't totally understand why. Like every game I go in, it feels like I'm just starting totally fresh. I find them round 2 and round 3. I know what I'm doing. Round 1, I really struggle to figure out what their opening move is. And also I feel like I'll be in the middle of the game like, wow, I guess I'm losing this, and then you'll just randomly do some things and win. And they're pretty fun. There's all sorts of ups and downs. I stacked a whole bunch of dice to have Stabbit throw 7 dice for his spear at a uninspired wounded chain rasp, and he couldn't land the kill. And then his wolf turned around and bit an inspired chain rasp in half and got me the kill I needed to score. So just strange things happen when you're rolling extra attacks for free. So that's what I've been up to. Madskullz, how about yourself?
So I went to a tournament recently, played Thorns, did not awfully, but not awesomely either. I had to bail early, unfortunately, because we ran out of time. But since then, because the Thorns are obviously a very strong meta pick at the moment, probably won't be surprised to learn that it kind of bored me a little bit, because they are awesome, they're fantastic, but everybody's running them. When I went to the tournament, I played 9 games. That's three best of 3. All of them were Thorns. It was 3 best of 3s mirror matches, and that was just
Oh no! Oh.
achingly dull. Don't get me wrong, it was interesting the first couple of times, but once you figure out what cards the other players got, it kind of it gets a bit harsh. So anyway, I went back to looking at, no surprise, Skaven, because prior to the recent tournament, I took him to a grand skirmish, and I got absolutely stuffed. I think out of 55-ish, I think I came 51st. So I got an absolute drubbing. Bad cards, bad deck, bad everything. And then a couple of people have recently been talking about some new decks which actually work quite well. So currently, back to Skavening.
All right.
Very nice.
How about you, Phil? What's your latest spin?
More experimenting. I haven't really settled on anything recently. I guess the thing I've been doing the most is Magors, just because I think they're a strong counter to the meta at the moment. But it's something I've played a lot before, and so I've still been playing around with some other ideas with things like Tome's Mollog in the new meta, and trying to figure out a way to get Reavers going again, and actually been thinking a little bit about Fire Slayers as well, but haven't pulled the trigger on that one just yet. So a number of different things to try out.
I just played against one of those the other night that scored temporary victory against me, which was appalling.
Wow.
So, yeah, well, I guess we should get to it. So Madskullz here, for those who don't know, is the famous or infamous brain behind the Festering and Hungering build that we saw at the end of the last season. And that is the sort of the revitalization of the Skaven, the Spike Claw Swarm deck that found a way to leverage certain cards to make them a pretty scary thing. And it felt like something of a slow burn. We're going to talk about, we'll use that as sort of a template at times, but basically it's this idea of creating a mad science deck. And Phil, this seemed particularly near and dear to your heart, so I think we're going to have you kind of take the reins on this one and direct us through this episode.
Sure. So this is something that I've enjoyed with this game a lot. Madskullz sounds like something that you're sort of very fond of as well, where we have this sort of concept of a mad science deck, but what is that? Well, I would sort of describe that as being a deck that sort of runs a strategy that's strange. It's sort of off the wall. It's doing something that's totally unexpected, and it's sort of hinging off of like 1 or 2 small pieces of a warband to turn it into this full-fledged strategy. And as we mentioned, Festering and Hungering is kind of like a prime example of this. One, because it's one that's well known, because these aren't necessarily commonly known things, and then 2, it just fits that template perfectly. So I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about the idea behind Festering and Hungering. Otherwise, I could run it down.
Yeah, no, of course. So fundamentally, it is centered around taking Festering, who has a unique upgrade, Festering Blades, and Hungering, who has a unique upgrade, Black Hunger, equipping them with their specific restricted upgrades, slapping on Expendable so that they're not worth any glory, Crown of Avarice so that you can take glory off a player that kills him, and sending those guys in. So you basically build those 2 fighters, depending on what cards you draw, into what is commonly known as a Voltron fighter, or I hate that term, but basically a very well upgraded fighter. Principally, the advantage of Skaven is that if you upgrade a fighter and it dies, as long as it's one of your worthless ones, you don't lose the upgrade. Bring it back. And that's a massive advantage. And where this kind of thing is all hinged around is you might lose that rat with all the upgrades, but you can get them back and you can charge again, or you can do whatever it is again. It's worth mentioning at this point that classical Festering and Hungering used Crown of Avarice and a whole lot of suicide ploys. So you'd have gambits that did damage to yourself. You'd give yourself Crown of Avarice. You'd run through a hex to pick up, lethal hex to pick up calculated risk, and then you'd off yourself with a self damage to steal a glory using Crown of Avarice. That isn't possible anymore, but the rest of the build is still fundamentally there, preserving upgrades, upgrading 2 fighters, and being very mobile and very aggressive.
And I think what made that sort of surprising to a lot of people is Skaven previously seen a fair amount of success at the with players like John Winreese, who were really leaning to Scritch doing a whole lot of work in season 1, and then sometimes people would dabble into the objective side of things. I think people were kind of aware that maybe there was something out there with the stacking up the fighters that you could return to the game, but it hadn't been as explored as fully.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I first started playing this game, I started on Spikeclaw Swarm, and I was also running that same build of get Scritch as powerful as possible, put all your eggs in that one basket, and hope that when you engage with the old cards like Quick Thinker and Time Trap and all that, that you get enough glory to win the game. And that was it. That was your big gamble. It was, can you get Scritch powerful? Can you farm enough glory with them? And that was kind of a one-trick pony, but a very effective trick pony. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So sort of to synthesize that into sort of like what is making Festering and Hungering a mad science deck, if you will, is that idea of having these unique mechanics that Skaven have, in that they can return fighters and that they have these unique upgrades that allow you to play aggressively with fighters without having the risk of bleeding a ton of glory.
Absolutely.
And so in a more general sense, at least in my view, if to be able to build a deck like this, the first key is figuring out what is that sort of thing that a warband has that you can exploit and turn into a full-fledged strategy. And if you don't have that, you can't really have this sort of off-kilter sort of deck idea. So personally, I've enjoyed playing around with this idea with the blue horror because of again, you can bring him back, so you can keep upgrades on him. You can keep doing things that people don't necessarily expect. And then also because you can summon him onto the board pretty much anywhere, he also has a lot of movement shenanigans that you can take advantage of.
Absolutely.
And so then I feel like the sort of next piece of sort of putting it all together is, once you identify that mechanic, you have to figure out how are you going to score glory off of that. So obviously Festering Hungering is kind of an aggro build, but it doesn't, like, these sorts of decks don't have to be aggro. So one example that I sort of like with the eyes is that you have Summoner, and that's sort of like the first kernel of the idea, is that, hey, I can suicide the blue horror, scoring things like calculated risk and martyred, and then I can bring him back and get glory for bringing him back. And then you can continue to build off of that, and suddenly you've got an idea that works off of this sort of interesting strategy. That's sort of been my sort of take on how to build out one of these mad science decks. For Festering and Hungering, was that sort of the progression for you? Was that sort of how it came to be?
Yeah, for me, the actual point at which it started was when I was looking at Festering Blades, because it was, at the time, it was viewed as being a low value clone of Concealed Weapon, which was restricted to a single fighter. So rubbish, basically, in other words. But it turns out that it's unique in that it works with range 1 or range 2. And Concealed Weapon didn't have that. So I was like, well, what does that work with? So I was like, well, that works with Nullstone Spear. I was like, well, okay, so now he's attacking from range 2. He does 4 damage on a crit if he's got the spear equipped. And then I was like, well, yes, but he's very fragile. And then I was looking at the new cards that were released for the Dwarven lot, and I was like, well, if I put Crown of Avarice on him, then if he kills someone, I get a point. and if someone kills me, I get a point for that too. And then I thought, well, that's great, but we also have expendable. So if you put expendable on hungering, you can use black hunger. And then I realized that you can actually use black hunger to kill your own rat for Crown of Avarice and claim points off the enemy. And I was like, well, this is insane. And that's where it all came from. So yeah, it was literally just the range characteristic on Festering Blades which triggered my thought process of this is something interesting. Yeah, so that's how it started. It was just range 1 or 2 on Festering Blades.
And I think your point of this is insane perfectly epitomizes how these sort of ideas work, in that these types of strategies don't come about necessarily organically. You sort of start to futz with weird things, and all of a sudden you've got this crazy thing that you want to try out. And so I feel like when I've been building decks like this, the experimentation process takes a number of iterations to sort of figure out, how do I make this work? Here's this idea. I'm going to start doing this. Now I need to go test it about 100 times.
Yeah, and that's it. And the Discord channels were absolutely amazing, because I'm sure you guys have already linked to them many, many times in the past. But the Reddit Discord channel, I was kind of saying, I've got this idea, people. And like loads of people were like, whoa, that's amazing. Have you thought about this? And my version, the basic version, was all right. It did some stuff. But over time, people added these strokes of genius to it that I'd never thought of. Like there's a card, it's season 1, I can't remember what it's called now, where you lose a fighter dies in friendly enemy and no man's land.
Oh,
Do you know what it's called?
Killing Ground.
That's the one, Killing Ground. And someone sent me a message saying, hey, I've just won a tournament of Festering and Hungering. And I was like, yeah, rub it in, why don't you? And I found Killing Ground, and I was like, oh, great. So not only are you a better player than me, but you're also a better decker, you bastard. And people just contacted me saying, like, I've done this. Have you tried it? And I was like, no. And a user on Discord pointed out that you could use shattering terrain to charge or move with a rat and die, and then you'd take the point, and madness like that. So while I had the initial idea, I don't think I can claim credit for what happened after that, because the community just ran with it. Absolutely mental stuff.
Yeah, and what I actually was when we were getting in touch to start talking about this episode, I remember going back through, and I found something where you and I had chatted a little bit. I said, hey, I'm going to try and use this deck, or I was telling you I did. And your replies were like, oh, which version did you use? Did you use the version that was like the Decidus variant or something, like you, I think your direct quote was, did you use the Decidus variant of F&H? I think I think his is an improvement on mine. And what I thought was cool is that you had this idea, and then you put it out in the world. Sometimes there's temptation when you think, hey, I might be onto something, is to, like, I'm going to kind of try and develop this in secret and see if I can come up with something.
Sneak out a tournament win.
Yeah, exactly. But,
well, to be honest, I think the version I came up with wouldn't have achieved that. In fact, when I've played it, I've had some very mixed results with it. I think I'm not bad at the ideas, and that thing was quite clever, but I'm not as good a player as a number of other players. Mike Carlin, for example, I think came second in a Grand Clash. He basically rolled a couple of bad results and didn't quite peg it with this deck. His version of it. So yeah, no, I mean, that was never really a factor for me. I'm not really into blowing away the meta. When you look at John Reese's Cuddle Ghost deck, with like all of the adjacency objectives, that is genius. That's fantastic. And he didn't share it with anyone, and that's cool because he's in it to win, and he stands a good chance. But if I'd have taken this to a tournament, I don't think I would have won. I'm just not that good a player.
Well, I think it makes it's fun to have that extra aspect of the community where it's like, here's this cool idea. Let's see what we can all do.
Yeah,
kick it around.
absolutely.
We bring it up.
That was very entertaining.
Yeah,
really
definitely.
Was.
And so I think it's maybe an interesting point to just jump to quick here, where we can sort of talk about some of the other decks in this vein that have sort of come about and sort of get disseminated through the community, or maybe even originate in sort of discussions in the community. One that I think maybe people could disagree about whether or not it fits into this category, but I think one that I believe does, and sort of came about through community discussion, is the Tome Mollog build after Carlin sort of brought it out in tournaments. And it's interesting how quickly something like that can go from this weird off the wall idea that once someone shows that it can work, that all of a sudden the community picks it up and starts messing with it and building it into this greater thing. Is there any others that people can think of that they've seen like that?
Not that immediately spring to mind.
So I would say that I think Jimmy Molini had a version of this, and then our bud Jeff Osborne had come up with something that you ended up using, Phil, which is a Reavers like supreme suicide deck, where they would, I mean, they're already that's a natural play style, but it just pushed it to the next level where was just spiking glory early and then trying to kill all his fighters real quick before you could get any more glory off of him. If he was playing against somebody aggro, and so against somebody like Thundrix Profiteers, who depend so much on making attacks to score their glory. Once all the Reavers were dead and had gotten a lot of glory, either between Pure Carnage and RIP Pure Carnage, and Corn Cares Not, and It Begins, that there was just no way to catch back up. So that was interesting when you and I played that matchup, where I was desperately trying not to kill your guys, but still keep going with mine. So
yeah, definitely. I know one that we've also talked about a bit is trying to find a way to run an objectives Magors. I don't think we've ever tried it yet, but I think maybe it could work. Community, get on that one.
Well, but I mean, you talk about where those come from, and you talk about needing that little seed, whatever plugged you in, and there it's the. I realized just how much trouble I was having with
Gartok.
With Gartok,
yeah,
oh, man.
That's awesome, isn't it?
Yeah, and so you're like, well, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just thinking that I have been mucking about with the idea of getting that dog, because the dog gets 2 victory points for killing an enemy commander, and can also hold an objective using the survival instincts card, so it can't be driven back. It's got 2 dodge when it's inspired. So, I mean, I think that Gartok and the dog could hold 2 objectives. But then, of course, the question is, do you want to hold them, or do you just want to use Mischievous Spirits?
Sure.
It's a case of, do you want to hold them or deny them, I guess. But I guess the dog with that survival instincts card would be really, really difficult to shift.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Phil, you mentioned earlier, you talked about Eyes of the Nine, and you talked about this summoning the blue horror being sort of their unique twist. I think the other thing you end up looking at them is they have so much teleport and movement shenanigans, but also back to that blue horror, the fact that that's a fighter that you cannot one shot, right? Like
it's
that.
True.
That opens up a lot of interesting possibilities. And was this you, Madskullz? There was like a torture horror deck. Was that
yes,
you?
That was
okay.
Yeah, that was one of my early things. So by moving him through lethals to trigger the transformation, you remove wound counters, which allows you to score Charmed Life for 2 points, end phase objective, if he's already got a wound to start with, an extra wound. And I did actually work on a turret horror build, which struggled a little bit because the only real damage upgrade you could use would be Glory Seeker and the other one, Fighter's Frost. Thank you, that's the one, Fighter's Ferocity. So really, the scope for its damage output was not great. But one of the things I've been experimenting with in the Eyes of the Nine, and I'm going to go back to experimenting with the Skaven, is Disturbing Presence, which I think is a massively undervalued card that nobody's yet figured out how to use.
Give us a quick rundown, because if somebody's not
Disturbing
familiar.
Presence. Disturbing Presence is a card that simply says if your fighter is adjacent to this fighter, the one with it equipped, that fighter can't charge. So when you look at the mobility of Skaven, and the fact that what they don't want is for you to charge Scritch, and you look at the Eyes of the Nine, and what you want there is for the horror to be focused, then Disturbing Presence is an amazing card. Obviously, there's counterplay in the form of pushes and all that jazz, but if someone's spending pushes to get away from your horror, you can then push back to get to them, or you're denying them the ability to take objectives by forcing them to expend pushes on a trivial fighter. So I think Disturbing Presence has got potential there, both in Festering and Hungering and in Eyes of the Nine horror-centered decks. But it's not something I've bottomed out yet. Just mad sciencing.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually something I've been working on too. I've got Disturbing Presence in mine, and I think there's actually now a lot of sort of interesting cards that you could throw around with the blue
Mm.
horror. Most recently, I think the what is it, the spine toad toxin or whatever.
Hmm.
This is
Because the
where if somebody takes for every move action they take, they'll take a point of damage.
Yes. So, but the restriction being that you can only apply the ploy to somebody who's adjacent to your fighter. So then the trouble is, how do you get them adjacent? Well,
Summon
just
the horror.
summon the blue right next to them and then poison them.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of stuff like that that you can mess around with the blue. And that's where I think he's sort of the key to making a weird, crazy deck with the
Yeah,
Eyes of the
completely
Nine.
agree. I think the potentials for control in Eye of the Nines, what do you call it? Baffling illusions, which changes your
Yep.
movement to pushes and scatters. That one combined with Disturbing Presence and a couple of others has serious potential. I think I'd really like to explore that after Skaven, because I'm looking at that at the moment. But yeah, I mean, I've Disturbing Presence on the Blue Horror is a fantastically interesting card, so I need a link to your deck after the cast, please. By the
Sure,
way, I
sure.
don't think I've mentioned I've never actually listened to a podcast before, but I'm on one. So this is one of those slightly surreal moments in life where you are being recorded for a podcast before you've ever listened to one. But the first one I will ever listen to will be What the Hex.
All right.
Uh-huh.
There you go. You
Great.
see, that's a shout out to you, which
World
probably isn't worth
exclusive.
much on your own
Yeah.
podcast, but you know.
So, yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean it's this fun of finding something that hasn't been fully explored, and that's we talk about that. There's so much room to explore in this game.
Well, I mean, like as you said, as I said earlier, with John Reese's Cuddle Ghost deck, where he had a load of objectives about surrounding the enemy, those cards were considered to be complete trash until he rocked along and said, "Hey, you know, if someone's appearing in your backyard, drop that card on them." And that was absolutely really amazing. That was really inventive. So yeah, there is
Yeah.
insane value out in those cards, which people don't really understand or use very often.
Right.
But figuring it out.
It often seems these cards that you see them and they kind of scratch a little bit at your brain. You're like, there's got to be something there. And then for me, it'll be after a little while, I'm like, it's just too hard. I can't figure it out. And then step away and then come back and well, somebody's made something amazing out of this. Like, okay,
Yeah.
I guess this.
Yeah.
All right,
like
cool.
Killing Ground. I mean, that was used by nobody ever. And then somebody just said, "Yeah, hey, it's really cool in your deck."
And then I started seeing it there, and I started seeing it some Sepulchral Guard players taking it. I had tried it at one point with them, and then you end up with these bizarre games where you're desperately not trying to kill that petitioner who had walked into neutral territory, or let's see if I can distract him first and then get him over there and then kill him. I don't know. It's just
it was good fun.
Or,
I think Games Workshop did the right thing when they closed off the Crown of Avarice suicide play, because that was getting a little silly. So that was a good call by them, I think, in terms of the meta health.
Yeah.
So speaking of the meta, where do we feel like decks like these fit into the meta, and sort of what are the pros and cons of running something super strange like this?
So obvious pro is nobody's expecting it. Which is good and easy. One of the accusations that was leveled against Festering and Hunger was that it was a little bit rules abusey, I guess, because the interaction between Expendable and a number of objectives and fighters wasn't fully understood by the community at large, because nobody really ran it. Not at tournament play, not at serious levels. So dropping that on an experienced player caused some friction. But dropping Expendable and Crown of Avarice on a novice player is pretty unpleasant, really. It was unpleasant. It wasn't cool. So playing off meta, it's nice. You can surprise people. That's enjoyable. An innovative approach is always good. It strengthens the game. But at the same time, the way that Crown of Avarice and Expendable were written and FAQ'd made for a very upsetting experience if you're playing against a new guy. So, I'm not sure about that.
Well, it can be a feel bad moment on both sides, on the person who's experiencing it. But I know that I'll feel bad if, there's certain interactions where I realize, I'm playing against somebody. I have to, well, actually,
Yeah.
often whenever you have to explain a more obscure rules thing and say you feel like you're, like a snake oil salesman, like you're trying to
Yep.
pull a fast one or
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
So,
It does. It can
uh,
feel a bit like you're kind of tricking or bullying somebody into accepting something that they don't think would happen or didn't
sure.
expect to happen, and
I,
that is a bit rough.
I will say though, if it's coming to Grand Clash or something, I like the idea that there's these wild cards out there that you know like the perpetual Eyes of the Nine player that somehow gets up
Yeah,
and makes the cut and gets up in there. I like that that's there and it's forcing the players who are playing sort of more on meta decks or more mainstream things. They're going to have to be able to react to something
mm,
unexpected. They've practiced. If you're going now, you've practiced a bunch against Grimwatch, but you still have to be able to react and adapt on the fly when somebody pops up with their whatever it may be, their crazy despoilers weapons deck or something like that
hmm
that you're not expecting to have to worry about gnarl being a threat or something like that. So
yeah, yeah. It's good. I mean, it is how the meta. Well, sorry, it's one way in which the meta grows and grows in a very interesting way, because they've now correctly defined expendable, so it's no longer going to surprise people as much in the recent FAQ. And Crown of Avarice has been tweaked to be more reasonable and balanced. And now we're looking at the contribution that it's made to the meta kind of growing and changing even more because people are aware of playing like this. And I think that, might be wrong about this, but I think that Skaven, because they don't lose upgrades, because of that, as a season goes on and more upgrades are released, they will gradually grow in power.
mm,
So at the start of the season, they were
sure.
dreadful. I mean, I
Yeah.
tried playing them, got stomped. But now you're looking at things like Glaive of the Guardian, which allows rerolls if you're holding an objective,
hmm
and the Jealous Defender card, which chooses, so it inspires a Skaven,
Oh, sure.
and allows a free attack, and Mischievous Spirits, which again synergizes with Skaven. So as cards are released, I actually think that Skaven benefit more than any other warband because of their ability to reuse cards again and again and again, and
Sure.
to keep that value on the table. Whereas other warbands will use it as a one shot, like Larval Lance, and it's gone forever.
That makes
So
sense.
I actually think that I don't think I'm changing the meta. I think that Skaven are changing the meta because people are realizing that there's this little plucky little warband from season one, and if you upgrade that guy, you don't lose that upgrade. And I think
Yeah.
that is going to really change things coming up. I
And
think these guys could actually be. They're going to start every season in a bad place because their faction cards are absolute trash, with one or two exceptions. But as time goes on and as more season cards are released, they'll become more and more powerful towards the end of the season, where they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Is my theory. I don't know if it's going to be true, but. And
Um,
again, sorry for going off piste. Went on a
no,
proper
no, no.
ramble there.
That's
But that's
definitely.
mad science, isn't it? Got to ramble
well,
for mad science.
yeah. Well, and then my thought is that there's we've seen it in a couple other spots too, but as cards rotate out, the relative value of other cards goes up.
Yeah,
When
absolutely.
concealed weapon existed, that's what made Festering Blades so overlooked. They said, well, why take a fighter specific one
Mm.
when there's one that now the difference being that Festering Blades, as you pointed out, worked at range 1 and 2. But now concealed weapon is gone. That makes Festering Blades a more unique option and
Absolutely.
perhaps increases its
And of
value.
course, it synergizes in a really interesting way with Glaive of the Guardian, because if you can re-roll
Oh,
all those dice,
yeah.
you can get more
Ooh,
crits.
yeah,
Yeah.
And
yeah.
you see, so I'm actually working at the moment. The direction I'm taking Spike Course Form at the moment is to look at. So Wiggle's already been posting decks, which are very clever, and I've been looking at that kind of approach, but also bringing in exclusively range 2 weapons and looking at getting as many dice and as attacks as possible to make Festering Blades completely spectacularly lethal. Um, so I think that's got direction. But because you're attacking from range 2, obviously you've got the ability to hold an objective and attack somebody without moving,
hmm
and so on and so forth. So I'll stop rambling now. But yeah,
Oh, it's
it's
definitely not rambling. It's all the it's. I mean, that's what we came here for. um, so that's it's sort of this interesting idea, right? That like the card pool can kind of adjust how certain strategies can appear in the meta. And I think it's actually interesting because sometimes, as you mentioned, as the season goes on, certain strategies start to sort of come out into themselves because they start to add one or two more cards that start to make sort of this whole machine work. Um, and conversely, I think there's some factions where they can start to do some really crazy stuff in the early parts of the season because there's not enough counters to what they're trying to
Exactly.
do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so something to definitely keep in mind, that there are some weird strategies that will only work sort of at the bookends, and you can try and take
Absolutely.
advantage of that limited
I mean,
card
I
pool.
think a great example of that is Grimwatch. So when they launched, they were just bonkers. I mean, you couldn't stop them. And then they released a immediate surge 2-point card, temporary victory, which allowed the ghosts to become better at holding objectives and scoring than the Grimwatch. So by releasing more cards, more universal cards, the older warbands actually grew in power relative to the bands that have a great starting position, but maybe can't leverage those universals as efficiently. So yeah, that was really interesting, I thought.
For sure. So we've touched on some pros and sort of where these kinds of decks fit into the meta. I guess one other one that I would sort of throw out there as a pro is that beyond just being something that is going to maybe catch your opponent off guard, sometimes the strategies that you're employing are things that are inherently hard to deal with. So the suicide reavers, for instance, that Davey was mentioning earlier, um, it's really hard to stop someone from killing their own fighters. And when that denies you from scoring glory, suddenly it becomes this uphill battle where once you're behind, it's really hard to catch back up. Tome's Mollog is kind of the same way, where it puts an opponent in a bad spot where you don't necessarily want to try and kill Mollog because he's so dangerous, but if you don't, he's going to score tomes, and then that's like
Yeah.
5 or 6 glory.
Yeah, and that's the same with Tome's Gun Dwarves as well, the Space Dwarves, because kind of getting in there to deal with that boss with 2 defense, 2 block defense, 5 hit points, range 3 attack, cleave 2 damage, and dealing with that is horrible. But if you don't go in there and deal with it, then it's just going to sit there on his little pile of glory, and it's game over.
Sure.
Right.
Which is very similar to Mollog, but more not passive, defensive than aggressive.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then what do you feel are some cons to trying to play a deck like this, or trying to make a strategy like this work?
The biggest trap you can fall in is misplaced confidence in your own invention. Having come, God, what was it, 51st or something out of 55? That was a bit of a. I mean, I had some bad rolls, but it wasn't just that. It was so to do a mad science deck, I guess you've got to have faith in your own analysis of the game, cards you're using, or that kind of jazz, and you can't rely on somebody else to have done it for you. So you pick up a meta deck like Thorn's Objectives, and there'll be some variation between them, but by and large, same cards, broadly the same strategy, and you know how it works and if it's going to work. So if you go to a tournament with something like that, you're probably going to do all right. Everyone knows how to play it. Some people know how to play against it, but you're going to do okay. But if you take a mad science deck in and you've got the fundamentals wrong, you believe in something that actually isn't as good as you think it is, and you're on a hide into nothing, you're going to get stuffed. A lovely Scotch guy, Benny, I think his name was, beat me 27-9, I think. 27-9 with Curse Breakers.
Yeah.
And that's what's going to happen when you are wildly confident or kind of cautiously optimistic about something that's actually complete crap.
Now you wouldn't know this because you have not listened to a podcast before, but Benny was recently a guest on here, so
yeah, lovely bloke,
he is
complete
great
bastard, but lovely bloke.
Yeah. Here's I don't know if this is a good spot for it. Is there anything that anyone here, like a particular card or warband or something that you have that sort of itch right now where you're thinking like, hey, maybe there's something there? Or actually, Phil, do you have more cons? Do you want to go over? I can return to
sorry.
No, I mean, I think really that sort of hits it on the head, and that the strategies are off the wall and they're complicated. So there's the potential that what you think is going to work isn't actually going to work as well as you had hoped. But then also
Mm.
that it's easy to misplay, right? I mean, if you've got this fairly complex strategy to have to sort of piece together and then you make a mistake, you potentially left yourself open to the whole sort of, the wheels could fall off and all of a sudden the strategy breaks down. And when that happens, there's not really a way to salvage it, I guess. So
Sure.
Agreed.
I think reps are really the key. You have to know what you're
Yeah.
doing and you have to know that it's going to work.
And when you talk about reps, like with a deck that is more oriented to the traditional strengths or a meta deck or whatever you want to call it, you have all your reps that you've done, but you basically have all the community reps.
Yeah, definitely.
People have taken a magic oriented curse breakers out for a bunch of rides, and they have some ideas of here they've done a lot of the groundwork, and so you're effectively co-opting a bunch of reps from the rest of the community. When you are going something totally new, something totally on your own, it's just your own reps, and that sample size is so small where you might say like, oh, I've had a lot of great success in the 15 games I've played, but relative to the whatever 1,500 games that somebody might have played with a more not a single person, but that the community has played with a more common archetype. That's pretty small. It's easy to accidentally draw some of the maybe erroneous conclusions from where you're going.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
My follow up here. Well, is that a good time for that, Phil? Or you got something else you want to?
No, yeah, I think that's a good thing to do next.
So I was thinking, is there, you looked at Spike Claw Swarm and you saw Festering Blades, and that got you thinking about something. And Phil looked at Eyes of the Nine and saw Summoner, and that got him thinking about something. Are there any cards or fighters or anything out there right now that are
absolutely
okay? What?
It's got to be the pages. So,
Mm-hmm.
as you know, the Eyes of the Nine have a faction-specific end phase 2-point objective for casting 4 spells. We also have these spell pages being released. And the advantage of the spell page upgrades is that they are spell actions, generally quite simple to cast, don't require a hostile target, which is your big problem with the with Vorti. And I think that you might actually be able to get the cast 4, and a cast 6 card into that deck with enough spell page support, and just sit in a corner and cast spells, much like Curse Breakers have been able to do for ages.
Sure.
But actually really make something of it for Eyes of the Nine, which for me would be tremendously satisfying, because it's the Chaos faction themed around magic, and they're, some would say, perhaps not that good at it, relatively speaking.
I think many people would say that, actually.
Yeah, I think I was maybe understating things a little bit more than I should have been. Yeah, they're absolutely terrible at it, and it would be really good to see them, from a thematic point of view, use loads of spells of a book to cast loads of spells, do lots of weird stuff that doesn't necessarily mean much to anybody. It's all part of Zinch's plan, obviously, and then score loads and loads of glory. And I think that's real potential. So I'm really looking forward to the more spell pages we get, the better. They've already got one which is a reaction, which allows you to reroll defense dice.
Yeah.
So you're looking at survival instincts to turn his dice into guard, maybe spectral armor, and the upgrade that lets you reroll any defense dice as a spell action.
Sure.
I think it's got real potential to form a sort of a turret style cast loads of spells thing, and that's going to be the most interesting thing, I think, for me over the next couple of releases. Is will that become viable at some point?
Well,
what about you guys?
It's funny that you mentioned that, because the Eyes deck that I'm working on right now has that style of play in it. But
are you going cast 4 or are you going cast 6? That's the question.
Double cast 4, and
double
then
cast
lots
4,
of stuff with the blue as well.
Yeah.
So
that's been my approach historically, and I've had some good success with it. What I really want to see, though, is a cast 6 viable, because that's a 3-point end phase, and that's a monster.
Yeah,
So when that happens, I think Eyes are going to be massive.
Yeah.
But I also think that at the same time, Curse Breakers are going to become one of the nastiest problems that the game's faced.
Yeah, I was gonna say that, like, I think for that cast 6, Curse Breakers are still the better choice, because they can do the same thing, but they have more casters to leverage. So
True.
in terms of magic, I see Curse Breakers as really, if you're gonna go pure magic, Curse Breakers I think is still the choice.
You're not wrong.
But I think now with Eyes you can sort of seed some magic in and be able to do it somewhat passively, and that way you don't have to throw Vortimus to his death just to be able to cast some spells. Other things that I've been sort of thinking about, I've not really had much experience with them, but I think there's a lot you could do with Gits. And like trying to figure out ways to make them sort of, I don't even know how to necessarily put it into words yet, but just like Sour Tongue is already such a pain in the ass, and then you combine that with what is it? The one where it puts him on guard all the time. So
it's not a legal combo, I think, for Snurg.
Yeah, he's never allowed to be on guard.
Oh,
yeah.
he's never
Not a
allowed to
legal
be on
combo,
guard.
no.
Well, scratch
No.
that. Never mind. But I still think they have some stuff going just through the sheer number of fighters.
They're the only warband I know of that can score Scrum without moving anyone.
Yeah.
Just
They
like
can
they
deploy the
start
Scrum.
the game.
Yeah.
Score Scrum.
Yeah.
Deploy scoring Scrum, I think, is useful. But yeah, Gits, I'd love to see those guys get used a bit more.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So I think through their movement and some of their other sort of strange mechanics through like scatter and some of that sort of stuff, I think they've got some legs to be able to do some weird things. And then I have been wondering more about, like you mentioned with Skaven, where you can upgrade fighters and turn them into monsters, and then they can keep coming back and they keep those upgrades. I think you might be able to do that with Sepulchral Guard. I've been thinking about.
I think so, yeah.
I did get beat by a Sepulchral Guard deck like that on Vassal.
It's happened to me too recently. Yes.
I think maybe there's something there, and I think it might catch people off guard if you're playing weapons Sepulchral Guard. So definitely something to think about there.
Well, I mean, yeah, local player plays guard, weapons guard, as you say, very, very well. And I think they're one of the warbands where at the start of the season, because they don't have terribly good in-faction cards, they're going to be fairly weak. As more and more universals are released, they're going to gain more and more strength. Especially because of, as we've said, keeping the upgrades and all that jazz. But Sepulchral Guard, I think, are uniquely placed to do a good job of objectives, but a great job of aggro as well when they're provoked when the stars align. So I really want to see where those guys go over this season. I think there's some people playing some really good things, and tomes as well. I mean, it's pretty tricky to kill an immortal skeleton.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we talk about what the little seed is to make something spark your interest, and for me with Sepulchral Guard, it's that they have two in-faction ploys that basically provide a free extra attack. One is if you missed, attack again, and one is after a friendly attack with somebody else.
Yeah.
Now, if you're attacking with a petitioner, who cares? But if you're attacking with, I don't know, Larval Lance, okay,
absolutely. Yeah. That's one of those cards that benefits tremendously from range 2 attacks. So you're looking at things like Larval Lance, the Glaive, because you're going to be standing on objectives anyway. And then you also look at Amberbone Spear, which is that one out yet? It's not, is it?
It's not out yet.
No. It might be coming soon.
Yeah.
So you look at these range 2 attacks, and that card is amazing with range 2 attacks. And of course, they synergize well with Challenge Seeker because they have low hit points. So yeah, I think the guard could do some real hurt.
Yeah, I just played against them with Rippas, and I had Rippa with all the health upgrades in the world, a little bit of damage on him, but deep in Sepulchral Guard territory. And I was like, oh, this is great. He's going to rampage through. And they opened up the 5th round with Harvester taking. I think he had to do 6 damage to Rippa to kill him, and so the Harvester had great strength, opened up with a swing, hit him, and then he reacted with the Necromancer command or ceaseless attacks, whichever the one is that, and then he had a petitioner stab Rippa to death with the Larval Lance.
Wow!
It's like, oh no, how did you do 6 damage in one activation? Like, oh no, terrible.
That's crazy, isn't it?
So.
Yeah.
But that was exactly down to that free extra attack, which I didn't see coming because we're not used to
There's,
thinking
yeah,
about ready for action or anything.
absolutely, yeah, and you're looking for, typically, most people, myself included, I think, look for adjacency as threat zone. So you have a mental note, I think most people do anyway, of Queen has threat zone of 2, everybody else has a threat zone of 1, and you're like, if I'm not adjacent, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to forget that someone's got lance or spear or nullstone spear or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one I keep on, I have not attempted. Well, my cop out as far as a deck that would be mad science is I feel like every game I play with Rippas is mad science because I don't understand how they go together. The other one I keep on looking. Everyone always builds guardians with Ilthari being the centerpiece for obvious reasons. She's got some great spells and things to capitalize there. But I keep wanting to have one where Galagan is the main man, where he gets
Yeah.
up in and you tank him
Yeah,
up.
range
So he's
2.
range 2. You could get up to 3 block with penalties for attacking him. If you can make it be a damned if you do, damned if you don't sort of situation. As far
Yeah,
as
I
I
think
hate to see.
that's one of the factions where, if they ever introduce serious mobility cards again, like Hidden Paths or something, then they're going to do extremely well, just because he can suddenly become a long range threat that can get anywhere or whatever. Gosh, I really hope they don't introduce a high mobility card like that, because it's been really nice for the last couple of months having a front line and a back line, and only having a couple of exceptions that can actually compromise the back line without first going through the front.
Sure.
So yeah, I hope they don't introduce that. But if they do, Galagan will be a monster. He'll be horrible.
Yeah.
It's been interesting with the return of Spectral Wings. I thought that would go away. The thing is, I think it was the combination of Spectral Wings and Hidden Paths that made it particularly oppressive. It has not. I mean, Spectral Wings has been popping up, but it hasn't been as painful as I thought it'd be. It still seems to hold a little bit, like you were talking about with the front and back lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Spectral Wings, I was worried about that coming back, actually. I thought it was going to be the end of this golden age of placement actually mattering. But you're right. And I think it's because Hidden Paths places someone somewhere, and they can attack and do stuff repeatedly. Sorry, my dog just sneezed on me. And with Spectral Wings, you'd do a move or a charge, and that'd be it. It wouldn't be too bad. If you got a charge off, one attack, it's unpleasant, but it's not the end of the world. Whereas Hidden Paths, you could just get repeatedly slugged by somebody. It was horrible.
Yeah.
Range fighters especially.
Oh yes, Hidden Paths, Stormsire, or what do you call the other guy, the dwarf guy, leader, Thundrick. That's it, of course.
Yeah.
Thundrick.
Yeah. Well, that Elthari's idea, I hadn't thought about that too much, but I think you could actually, in a lot of situations, now that we've got so many more ranged fighters, you could actually be seeing him on 4 block, and because of the Cloak of Shadows, which if they're not adjacent, you get +1 defense. And so if he's on 4 block and any crits deal damage back to his opponent, that's suddenly pretty scary.